After 6 years of sitting in a desert graveyard, the last Boeing 737 MAX has finally escaped Moses Lake. 450 brand new aircraft, essentially abandoned in the middle of nowhere because Boeing couldn't figure out how to build a plane that wouldn't kill people. The aircraft that spent its entire existence parked on concrete and is now finally getting its first real chance to carry passengers. But the real question is, would you dare to sit on it? Think about that for a second. While you've been living your life for the past 6 years, getting promoted, changing jobs, maybe even getting married, there's been a fleet of ghost planes sitting in a Washington desert collecting dust. These weren't old aircraft being retired. These were factory-fresh jets that never got to do what they were built for, because 2 catastrophic crashes in 2018 and 2019 killed 346 people and exposed Boeing's reckless engineering shortcuts. Now, here's where it gets really twisted. Boeing didn't just stop production when the 737 MAX got grounded worldwide. Oh no, they kept building them anyway, banking on the crisis blowing over in a few months. Manufacturing continued while airlines refused deliveries, regulators demanded answers, and families mourned their loved ones. The result? A surreal aircraft boneyard in Moses Lake, Washington, where hundreds of million-dollar jets sat parked like abandoned cars in a shopping mall lot. Moses Lake became the epicenter of Boeing's hubris. At its peak, 450 brand new 737 MAX aircraft were stored there, turning a small airport into the world's most expensive parking lot. Boeing had to invest in upgrading the airport facilities just to accommodate their mistake. They relocated entire teams of workers to maintain aircraft that weren't flying anywhere. Imagine explaining that job to your family. I spend my days maintaining planes that can't legally fly because our company prioritized profits over passenger safety. But Moses Lake wasn't even the full story. Another 200 aircraft were scattered across storage facilities in San Antonio, Victorville, and the Puget Sound area. We're talking about 650 aircraft in total. That's roughly equivalent to the entire fleet of Southwest Airlines just sitting there, doing absolutely nothing. The financial bleeding was astronomical, but Boeing had painted themselves into a corner with their own arrogance. Here's what really gets me fired up about this whole situation. The final aircraft to leave Moses Lake was destined for Air China, and it perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with this disaster. This particular jet was built in 2019, right around the time of the Ethiopian Airlines crash, and then got caught in a perfect storm of regulatory grounding, the COVID-19 pandemic, and trade tensions between the US and China. Talk about bad timing. This aircraft couldn't catch a break if its life depended on it. Speaking of China, those final 20 aircraft were all bound for Chinese airlines, and China was the last major market to recertify the 737 MAX for passenger service. You'd think after 6 years Boeing would have learned some humility, but their chief financial officer Brian West was still making optimistic predictions about clearing inventory by the end of 2024. Spoiler alert, they missed that deadline by 6 months. Even their damage control timelines were unrealistic. The numbers behind this debacle are staggering, and I guarantee most people have no idea just how much money was involved. Each 737 MAX carries a list price of around $134 million, though airlines typically negotiate significant discounts. Still, we're looking at somewhere between $60 to $80 billion worth of aircraft that spent years generating zero revenue while costing millions in storage and maintenance. Boeing was essentially running the world's most expensive aircraft museum. What fascinates me most is how Boeing managed to spin this as some kind of success story. Their internal news statement reads like a victory lap, marking the beginning of the end for 737 MAX storage operations. Really? 6 years of storing aircraft because you couldn't build them properly the first time is now a milestone worth celebrating? The sheer audacity is almost admirable. During this storage nightmare, Boeing employees at Moses Lake had one of the strangest jobs in aviation. They were essentially aircraft babysitters, performing regular maintenance on planes that couldn't fly passengers. These workers had to run engines periodically, check systems, replace parts that degraded from sitting unused, and prepare aircraft for eventual delivery. It's like being a mechanic for a car that's permanently parked in the garage. The regulatory approval process for these stored aircraft was another layer of complexity that Boeing probably didn't anticipate. Each aircraft had to be individually inspected and certified before delivery, even though they were brand new when stored. 6 years of sitting outside in desert conditions meant seals, fluids, and electronic components needed thorough examination. Some aircraft required significant work before they could be considered airworthy. Now here's something I bet you didn't know. And honestly, if you're finding this as wild as I am, smash that subscribe button, because this aviation industry is full of stories that sound too crazy to be true, but unfortunately, they absolutely are. The Moses Lake facility became so integral to Boeing's operations that they essentially turned it into a secondary production facility. Workers there weren't just maintaining aircraft, they were completing final assembly tasks, installing customer-specific configurations, and conducting test flights. The financial impact on Boeing extended far beyond just storage costs. They had to pay penalties to airlines for late deliveries, provide compensation for the grounding period, and invest billions in the MCAS system redesign. Some analysts estimate the total cost of the 737 MAX crisis exceeded $20 billion when you factor in all the associated expenses, legal settlements, and lost sales. What really grinds my gears is how this entire situation was avoidable. Boeing's original sin was trying to avoid the costs and time required to develop a completely new aircraft. Instead, they kept modifying the 1960s-era 737 design, installing larger engines that changed the aircraft's flight characteristics, then created the MCAS system to compensate. When that system malfunctioned, it pushed the nose down so aggressively that even experienced pilots couldn't recover. The human cost of Boeing's shortcuts cannot be overstated. 346 people died because Boeing wanted to save money on pilot training and compete with Airbus. Families were destroyed, lives were cut short, and the aviation industry's reputation took a massive hit. Yet, here we are, celebrating the fact that the last aircraft finally left storage as if it's some kind of achievement. International regulators took vastly different approaches to recertifying the 737 MAX. The FAA, which had initially certified the problematic MCAS system, was relatively quick to lift the grounding in late 2020. European regulators were more cautious, conducting independent reviews and requiring additional pilot training. China was the last holdout, and their reluctance probably had as much to do with trade politics as safety concerns. The Moses Lake storage operation also highlighted another uncomfortable truth about modern aviation manufacturing. Boeing was so confident in their ability to resolve the crisis quickly that they kept production lines running for months after the grounding. This wasn't just optimism. It was a calculated gamble that they could fix their reputation and regulatory issues faster than their cash flow could handle production stoppage. They were wrong, spectacularly wrong. Airlines that had 737 MAX aircraft in their fleets faced their own nightmare scenario. These carriers had paid for aircraft they couldn't use, had to lease replacement aircraft at premium rates, and dealt with schedule disruptions that lasted years. Some airlines canceled their orders entirely and switched to Airbus, dealing Boeing a double blow of lost revenue and strengthened competition. The final departure from Moses Lake represents more than just clearing inventory. It's Boeing attempting to close the book on the darkest chapter in their corporate history. But here's the thing. You can't just move aircraft out of storage and pretend the underlying problems that created this mess have been solved. Boeing's corporate culture of prioritizing financial metrics over engineering excellence hasn't fundamentally changed. Looking back at this 6-year storage saga, it's almost impossible to comprehend how a company as established as Boeing managed to create such a colossal mess. These weren't experimental aircraft or prototype designs. They were production aircraft that should have been carrying passengers from day one. Instead, they became symbols of corporate negligence and engineering failure. The story of the 737 MAX storage operation will likely be studied in business schools for decades as a case study in how not to manage a crisis. From the initial decision to keep production running during the grounding to the overly optimistic delivery timelines, Boeing's management seemed to be making one questionable decision after another. As that final Air China 737 MAX departed Moses Lake, it marked the end of one of the strangest chapters in modern aviation history. 6 years, 450 aircraft, billions in losses, and countless damaged relationships later, Boeing can finally say their inventory is clear. Whether they've learned the right lessons from this experience remains to be seen. Based on their recent track record, I wouldn't bet the farm on it. But here's the part that should terrify every passenger. Boeing's current production issues suggest they haven't learned much at all. Right now, as we speak, Boeing is dealing with quality control problems on their 787 Dreamliner, door plug blowouts on 737 MAX aircraft that are actually in service, and whistleblower testimonies alleging continued safety shortcuts. The Moses Lake nightmare might be over, but Boeing's safety culture crisis is far from resolved. The ripple effects from those 6 years of storage continue to impact the aviation industry today. Airlines are still dealing with delivery delays, passengers are questioning aircraft safety like never before, and Boeing's competitors have gained significant market share. Airbus managed to secure hundreds of new orders while Boeing was busy playing aircraft warehouse manager in the desert. What's particularly infuriating is how Boeing's executives received bonuses and stock awards throughout this entire debacle, while 346 families mourned their loved ones and shareholders watched billions evaporate. Boeing's C-suite was compensated handsomely for navigating the crisis. CEO Dennis Muilenburg was eventually fired but walked away with a $62 million severance package. That's more money than most people will see in several lifetimes, awarded for presiding over one of the worst corporate disasters in aviation history. Insurance companies also took a massive hit from the 737 MAX crisis. Aviation insurers had to pay out billions in claims for the crashed aircraft, business interruption coverage for airlines, and liability settlements for passengers and families. These costs ultimately get passed down to consumers through higher premiums across the entire aviation industry. Subscribe for more aviation stories, and what do you think Boeing should have done differently?